Welcome everyone to this edition of How to Church. Today we're looking at a very prescient question and timely question, especially for the churches and pastors in our local conference area, our region. Because coming soon, our conference, Penn Northeast Conference, which for years and years and years has functioned as a conference and also as an association, at the end of the year will cease to be a conference and will be merging with the newly forming Keystone Conference involving all four of the conferences in Pennsylvania, and then becoming the Mountain Valley Association. And so a lot of our churches, a lot of our pastors are asking, all right, what does that mean and how is that going to affect us, this sort of change and shift where what had been two things, or what had been functioning as one thing in two parts, I mean, it's very Trinity kind of speaking thing here, but now is going to become two separate things. And so we're going to have a little conversation here. It's myself, Matt Gorkas. I'm the pastor at Church of the Good Shepherd in Albertus. And I have with me Reverend Dr. Dave DeReamer, who is currently serving at St. Paul's UCC in Trexlertown, and is also the moderator of the transition team that is the transition board helping kind of bring the Keystone Conference together. Mm-hmm. He has also spent many years teaching polity, being a professor of polity. So, I mean, he's as close to an expert on this as I think we could get for a panel here. I also have with me Reverend Kim Baranato, who is the pastor at Long Swamp UCC. And she, in her ministry career, has had the opportunity of serving in other ministry settings to have had the experience of serving where these two things were separate, where there was already an association and a conference, and they were apart from each other. So she's experienced what we're all about to experience. And so I kind of just want to start with the two of you with the general overview question. That is, we've been functioning as a conference and association for so long that a lot of folks, including myself, I mean, I took your polity class, but it's been a lot of years and I don't know how much of that I've retained. A lot of folks maybe don't really know what the difference is between a conference and an association. Sure. And what seeing them separate will look like for us.
Well, the basic place to start answering that question is with the national church bylaws, right? And so there, the distinction is pretty clear that a conference relates to the national setting of the church. And it does that by electing general synod delegates, by setting the OCWM level of support, and by utilizing the resources of the national setting to serve local churches in the conference. The association, on the other hand, is supposed to be focusing on ministerial issues, authorization, discipline, oversight, and local church programming, which relates then to the clergy. So you've got two different foci, essentially, one to the national setting and one to the local church and ministerial setting. I guess that's probably the kind of thing you experienced, Kim.
Absolutely. I was sort of surprised when I came to the Penn Northeast Conference that the conference was functioning as an association, because I was so used to, in local church ministries, both in the Pennsylvania Southeast Conference where I had worked previously and in the Connecticut Conference where I was ordained, all of that local ministry happened within the association setting and not in the conference setting whatsoever.
Sure. And I think that's where we're headed. In terms of the way in which the new bylaws for the Mountain Valley Association have been written. They basically take all of the committee on ministry and search and call and nominating process and even a new program committee and focus them on the association, the churches and ministers in the association.
So based on the way that you described with the national bylaws, correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost sounds as though the conference connection to local churches is to connect to the institutional pieces of the local churches, and the association's connection is to the local churches and the people, the pastors, the actual ministry. Does that sound sort of like a fair, like that's where the connection is of the local church to these higher bodies where it's people versus institution piece?
In the settings, for instance, that Kim experienced. But here in Penn Northeast Conference, it was all blended together. And so it was difficult to separate those two things. The piece that I think we're going to experience now as we transition is, for example, the staff overseeing or working with the local churches, our transitional associate conference minister, Nora Faust, is going to be relating to about 180 congregations as opposed to Penn Northeast's 120. And the same will be true with the other two regional conference ministers who are relating to the entire 530 congregations in the Keystone Conference. So it's going to be up to the association, Mountain Valley Association, to be connecting to our local clergy, our local authorized ministers, and our local churches.
Yeah. So I think the thing that popped into my head as you were talking about that, and even from Kim's experience, is that I think one of the things that we're going to experience in this is that, at least early on, our sense of the conference, we might experience the conference as seeming more impersonal than the way that we had experienced our conference to this point. But that was because we were getting the conference with the association piece built into it that had a more personal connection where you can call up the conference minister and feel, or call somebody and that it felt very personal. Whereas I think the way that you're chiming is that personal piece is the association aspect, and the conference piece, because of just how big it is and kind of what its focuses are, the conference isn't necessarily expected to be so personal.
I know I joke when I was in the Connecticut conference and was ordained, I'm not sure the conference had anything to do with it, is one of the things I say, because everything was truly through our small association. All of my interviews, all of my conversations, everything was through that association level. I'm not even sure anyone from the conference was there at the ordination, because it just wasn't how it was run.
Well, and so, I mean, I think that you touched then on one thing with the ordination process. I'm wondering if there are other things then that we can think of, because I know one of the questions that folks are asking is, with the shift, the transition happening, and, like you said, some of the teams and kind of committees and things going this way and to the conference level, and some staying kind of in-house, so to speak, in the association, what can, I guess, our churches or pastors expect? Like, how can they expect to be affected by this? Are there parts that you can kind of already see this is going to impact you, versus this change is going to happen, and for the most part you're going to keep doing what you've been doing and whatever. So I think if you're in the ordination process, and certainly like Kim said, that's going to change how your ordination process works.
Yeah. So let me give a positive and a negative example. Okay. I think the negative example is that the various working groups of the Committee on Ministry in the new Mountain Valley Association are going to find that the leaders of those committees are going to be taking on much more responsibility. Now, we will have a paid registrar that's going to help with all the record keeping and all the minutes and all the correspondence that those groups have to deal with. But nonetheless, the chair people are going to take on more responsibility, and Bonnie isn't going to be on the screen every time we have a Zoom meeting of one of those working groups. So that's a negative. Here's a positive. Some of our task forces, like the disaster relief group, are going to be joined by disaster relief task forces from the other three conferences. And so the response will have more resources, more people, more ability to address the issues that are of concern to them. So there's a negative and there's a positive. And I think that'll probably be true of everything in this transition.
Well, and I think I joke that the Penn Northeast Conference has been spoiled with Barbara and Patty for all of these years, to just be able to pick up and call someone who is likely sitting at a desk during business hours, pastors, who has all of this knowledge of the conference and the churches and all of this. That is something that many other pastors do not have the ability to do, is just pick up and call somebody with that position and who is in a physical location. So many conferences and associations don't have physical locations either. So I think that's going to be a pretty big adjustment, is just not having that sort of 9-to-5 person with institutional knowledge that you can call and will know the answer to your question right away. There will still be people we can call, but they're not going to be full-time. They're not going to be sitting in Palmerton. And it's going to take a little bit more figuring out to maybe answer the questions we have.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, one of the questions early on that I kept asking is, who's going to answer the phone? Because right now, when we call that number, somebody, Barbara or Patty, answers the phone. What's going to happen is that we now, in what was the historic Penn Northeast Conference, we're gonna have the phone answered by the administrative assistant to Nora Faust. So there will be somebody answering the phone, and there will also be somebody answering the phone if you're calling to the conference minister's office, which is Carrie Carr is our transitional executive conference minister. So there are people there, but all those new relationships will need to get built. It's not like, I've been in Penn Northeast Conference my entire ministry, 40 some years, and Patty and Barbara have been there the whole time, right? So it's been wonderful to have that relationship.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a key part, right? Is the relationships and the trust. Because I think, when we're thinking about, and we were talking beforehand and talking about how this is a unique challenge to our conference, that all of the 4 conferences who are becoming part of this Keystone Conference are facing their own challenges in this transition. But the one particular to us is this having to now learn what we are as an association, and also that we're the conference who is essentially losing all of the staff that we have had. That we're not bringing forth necessarily any people that we already know into this new conference. And so the relationship piece and learning to trust people that we don't know quite so well, I think is going to be part of that.
Now, here's a good news piece again. Right? Nora Faust, again, who is our regional conference minister, Nora is staffing 3 associations, not 10. Right? So I think we will see her, and we already have. We saw her at our fall annual meeting. We saw her at Ministry Day. So Nora will interact with us, not unlike the way Bonnie interacted with us, and I think that she will be accessible. The thing that we have to keep in mind, however, is she doesn't know all of us, and so that's part of that building of relationship that you were talking about, Kim.
So then along the lines of, I think it's good that we've been sort of highlighting pros and cons, or I don't like to think of them as cons. I like to think of them as things that are going to challenge us. Things that are going to be challenges for us to have to figure out.
Sure.
Are there other ways in which you're looking at this change, especially because I'm thinking especially the change, not necessarily of becoming the Keystone Conference, but of I don't want to even say just being the Mountain Valley Association, but there's a sense in which by no longer having to function as both a conference and association, by being able to let go of some things that are going to go to the Keystone Conference, is there opportunities then to do some things better as an association when we can just focus on being an association? Like, do you see both challenges, but also are there opportunities for this to be a real boost to like what we've been doing?
What do you think?
I mean, when I was part of the Covenant Association, I was the registrar and communications person for the Covenant Association. We were able to do a lot together because, as you know, churches are smaller. And especially in our area, there are places where, you turn a corner and there's a UCC church and another UCC church. And it gave us the ability to focus on working together for things. We did potato picking in the Covenant Associations, where we went and we picked potatoes for local food banks. And so there were fun things like that we got to do. But I also see that as a challenge because we're a big association and we are spread out by land. So I think some of the pros that I've experienced from the association life in the past might actually be harder for us to grasp here because we're so spread out.
And I think that is a question. The size of the association is a question that we as an association need to be looking at and evaluating. And, I recall a time when Penn Northeast Conference was made up of 4 different associations. And I don't know that we need to be 4 associations, but perhaps 2, each with 60 congregations, would be a little bit better in terms of being able to do that local church programming, because that is a responsibility of the association, and in this new model that we have.
But then you need twice as many committee on ministry heads,
Well,
and those are hard to come by.
And that's what Bonnie keeps reminding
But
everybody.
because it's a lot of work to do that when there's not a conference sort of holding it up.
All of that recruitment work falls to a nominating committee to find those chair people who are now shouldering more responsibility. We've got we've got an opportunity and we've got a challenge here that keeps coming back to the pro and the growing edge. The positive and the growing edge. But I think also we may find that because we've been operating as a conference and an association, in other words, we think of ourselves as a unity, as an entity, we may find that it's easier to continue those kinds of relationships. And who knows, maybe the area mission councils will actually revitalize themselves, or that might be a good thing as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point about there's already some of that network, some of that fabric in place that in becoming now an association, we're not necessarily becoming something that we haven't already been. That a lot of the teams and the leadership and the volunteers that power associations in a lot of ways, like a lot of those people and a lot of that structure is already working great. And so we're not reinventing the wheel to be an association. I think it's just learning how to do that in kind of a new context, a new sort of situation.
And I think with time we will find out how much we were already doing and how much the committee on ministries were already managing and the working groups were already managing. And we will find out with time how much the conference staff was maybe doing that was association responsibility. And I think only time's going to let us know those things.
But back to a prior question, when people were feeling that they might be disconnected because of the larger sense of this. So 2 things that often arise for clergy and for the local church secretary is that the clergy are trying to figure out, authorized ministers are trying to figure out how to record their continuing education stuff. And local churches, the secretary is trying to answer a question about the form they have to fill out from the national church every year. Both of those questions go to the association registrar. That's the person who is linked to or will link to the data hub of the national setting by way of the conference office. And so those kind of questions, how do I fill out this form? How do I do this? How do I get authorization for that? That all goes to the registrar. But if an authorized minister needs to sit and talk through a question of their call to ministry, or whether their current ministry setting is utilizing their gifts and skills most effectively, that conversation goes to the conference staff, like it always has. And you sit with, in this case, the associate conference minister to talk through those things. So we still have the same resources. People are just going to have to learn 2 different phone numbers, depending on what the issue is.
The other, and this one just popped into my head, and I realized that I would be remiss if I didn't bring this into the conversation too. Is one of the folks in my church is sort of working also with the transition team on some of the financial pieces of it, and just how now OCWM and association funds, and how knowing that there's now kind of two areas of wider church that are going to sort of need to be supported by local congregations. How is that going to affect local congregations? And also just like, how do those monies then come back to local churches to help? Like, how do we know where to best support so that the money then benefits, the ministry that we're doing?
Right. So in the short term, in 2025, OCWM contributions get sent to Palmerton, like they always have, right? Up until, I guess it's like the 15th of January or something.
very
Until they close the
term.
books.
Yeah.
Until they close the books.
Right. And that also includes any of the ministry offerings that we take and our pass-through offerings. They all go to Palmerton through January 15th. From that point on, OCWM contributions go to the Keystone Conference in Linglestown, outside of Harrisburg, which is where the conference office will be located. By the way, they're using office space in a local UCC congregation, just like our association office will be in a UCC congregation. So the contributions go there. However, we're going to have costs associated with the association. Those contributions will get mailed to the association office in Northampton to support the, I think it was a proposed $25,000 budget, something like that we have to pay for insurance and computers and the registrar and a few other basic administrative costs. So we're going to need to be supporting two different things out of our local congregations. Hopefully people will support the new Mountain Valley Association. I have a concern that doesn't get forgotten in the whole transition.
Well, and that's why I wanted to ask, because I think that's one of the things that from local church pastoral level that we're going to have to be conscious of.
Absolutely.
is that is going to change. You can't just write one check for OCWM, because it sounds like that's going to go to Keystone, and Mountain Valley isn't going to see that. And it's like, so we're going to have to be more conscious of how we're understanding our support for the wider church. Right.
And as pastors sitting here, we know our churches love when we say, by the way, there's another organization that we need to support that you don't really understand. Yeah.
Well, and the fact of the matter is, if a congregation takes its OCWM and peels off a portion to support the Mountain Valley Conference, the Keystone Conference is going to fall short. Period, done, end of story.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality, because the new conference budget is based on the current OCWM giving of the four historic conferences. So we are wedded to that.
Yeah, expecting that same OCWM.
Expecting that same OCWM support.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, one of the times we often, because now we all have two meetings. We have the association meetings, and now we have the conference meetings that we need to go to, which again was normal if you were in a different conference, but being a conference and association together in Penn Northeast, you lucked out. You only had to go to 2 meetings a year instead of 4. However, we often took offerings during those association meetings, and that was what a big thing we did to sort of offset the cost of the association.
Right. And the Friends of the Conference group now becomes the Friends of the Mountain Valley Association group, and so the dollars that they are raising as second mile giving also goes in to support the association.
Another practical thing that came up at the Penn Northeast Conference meeting was that every church in the Penn Northeast Conference is going to have to change their bylaws.
Well, in terms of just the language.
The language, because our bylaws, most of them say that we're part of the Penn Northeast Conference. So those will have to be changed. And there was a suggestion, just for all of you watching, that when you do change them, to make it so that it says the Keystone Conference and its successors, so that you don't ever have to do that again.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah, and I want to also say that we may want to have a conversation in the Mountain Valley Association about apportionments, whereby a congregation is asked to contribute a particular amount of money based, I think, on its worship attendance numbers, not its membership numbers, on those that are active in the life of the congregation. But that's a way to then provide the basic dollars necessary to support this association that is directly related to supporting the local congregations and the authorized ministers here. Many of our other denominations have apportionment-based support, and I think we may want to consider that for the association. I know that's anathema.
Well, yeah, no. I didn't mean to take us down a rabbit hole talking about money to sort of as we near what I think is the end of this conversation. But I think that is one of the practical impacts that it's going to have on our local churches.
For sure.
Is that piece. And I think, what I'm hearing in this conversation is that one of the overarching challenges that we're going to face is just building new relationships with the members of this new conference, with the staff that we're going to have in this new conference, with the other churches and other teams that are being brought together in the new conference. That building those relationships, building that trust, if we can do that, will enable us with the new resources to do bigger, better ministry together. And I think what I'm hearing for sort of one of the hopeful things for us as an association is just that that's where that personal touch is already in place. The volunteers, the people who have already been making so much go in the Penn Northeast Conference are going to keep making the Mountain Valley Association go. And so there's already a lot in place. And I think it's going to be the challenge to remember to keep supporting that as we move forward, because I think that's going to continue to be where we get so much back from when our local churches need coaching, need some programming, need that kind of stuff. It's going to be because that association already has it there to help us.
Correct.
So I think it's, and hopefully people watching this are getting out of this like, okay, it's not going to necessarily be smooth sailing, but there's lots of positives that are right in front of us.
And it's not, it's not worth being so anxious about. All the other conferences have been functioning like this for years and years and years, and they're okay. And we're going to be okay too.
For sure.
Well, thank you both for being part of this, and thank you for the work that you're both doing with your churches, with this transition, with just trying to help our churches, help Penn Northeast, help this area do ministry. And I think that's the heart of this. It's the heart of the whole transition. It will enable us to do better ministry, and it takes work to get there, and I think our people are up for it.
Yeah.
So thank you.